At a small, budget hotel on the outskirts of the city, no one paid much attention to the quiet woman who checked in that evening. She was dressed simply, her luggage modest, and her demeanor unassuming. The staff barely noticed her as they handed over the room key, and the other guests barely gave her a second glance. But little did they know, they were about to make a huge mistake. As she settled into her room, the laughter of a few guests echoed in the hallway. They whispered about her, making jokes about her poor choice of accommodation and her unremarkable appearance. "What's she doing here?" one of them chuckled. "Probably another traveler down on their luck," said another. To them, she was just another face in the crowd, blending in with the dozens of other budget-conscious travelers. But as the night unfolded, an unexpected twist would change everything. What they didn't realize was that the woman they were mocking wasn't who they thought she was. Beneath the simple exterior was a story of incredible wealth, success, and power that would soon leave them stunned. Her life had been a roller coaster of hard work, setbacks, and triumphs, and now she was about to reveal a truth no one could have predicted. As they laughed and talked, unaware of the storm brewing just around the corner, they had no idea that their perceptions were about to shatter. Stay tuned, because what happens next will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about appearances and success. The woman's name was Clara, though no one at the hotel knew that. She was far from the image the other guests had painted of her. Born into modest beginnings, Clara had spent most of her life fighting for every opportunity. She had worked her way up through a series of challenging jobs, each one a stepping stone toward her ultimate goal, to build something of her own, something that could change the course of her life. But her journey had been anything but easy. For years, she'd have faced setbacks and doubts from others, people who looked at her and saw only what was on the surface. She had been told time and time again that she wasn't capable, that someone like her would never make it. And yet, Clara was determined to prove them wrong. What they didn't know was that Clara had recently sold a startup she had built from the ground up, a technology company that had skyrocketed in value after years of hard work. The deal had made her a millionaire, but rather than flaunt her newfound wealth, she chose to live simply. She didn't care about the designer clothes or flashy cars that others seemed to crave. To her, they were distractions from what truly mattered: freedom, peace, and the ability to control her own destiny. That's why she was in that budget hotel in the first place. She didn't need luxury to feel content. In fact, she found comfort in anonymity, away from the pressures and expectations of the world that had once judged her. But little did Clara know, her past was about to catch up with her. The small, budget hotel was about to become the setting for a revelation that would leave everyone around her questioning their assumptions about her and about themselves. The following morning, Clara awoke early, as she always did. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the hotel was still quiet, save for the sound of the occasional car passing by outside. She made herself a cup of coffee in the small kitchenette, savoring the simplicity of it all. She didn't need much. A good book, a hot drink, and some quiet time to herself. It was the only luxury she had allowed herself in months. As she sipped her coffee, Clara couldn't help but overhear the laughter and chatter of the other guests in the hallway. It was mostly idle gossip, harmless and trivial. But then she heard something that caught her attention. The voices were talking about her. "Did you see her last night? I swear, she looked so out of place," one woman said. "I don't know. There's something off about her," another added, her voice dripping with judgment. Clara's face flushed, but she remained calm. It wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated, and it wouldn't be the last. She had learned to live with the whispers, to embrace the fact that people would always judge her based on what they saw, not what they knew. Still, it stung a little. She hadn't done anything to deserve their mockery. She was simply existing quietly, without causing trouble. Little did they know, Clara wasn't the only one with a story. Across the hall, another guest, Michael, overheard the conversation as well. He was the kind of person who loved to stay under the radar, but something about Clara's situation intrigued him. He had his own reasons for keeping a low profile, reasons that made him more empathetic to her plight than most. But there was something else, something he couldn't put his finger on. Why had she chosen this hotel? Why had she seemed so familiar when she checked in? In the corner of the hotel's small dingy lobby, a business card was left behind by a mysterious man. The words Clara Bennett, CEO, was scrawled on it, and Michael couldn't help but notice it as he walked by. As the day wore on, Clara kept to herself, trying to avoid the whispers and glances from the other guests. She had grown used to the judgment, but today felt different. It was almost as if the atmosphere in the hotel had thickened, the tension palpable, like a storm waiting to break. She spent her afternoon working on her laptop in the hotel lounge, pretending not to notice the curious eyes that lingered on her. Every now and then, she would catch someone stealing a glance, their faces twisting in confusion or disbelief. Meanwhile, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. He had seen the business card, and the name Clara Bennett had struck a chord with him. He knew that name from somewhere, but where? His mind raced through every business magazine he had ever skimmed, every tech article he had read. He was sure he had heard about a CEO named Clara Bennett who had recently sold a multi-million-dollar company. But could it really be her? The woman sitting quietly in the corner, unassuming, in a budget hotel. The more he thought about it, the more the pieces didn't add up. That evening, as Clara was about to leave the lounge, a man walked in, one of the very guests who had been mocking her earlier. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw her, a look of shock spreading across his face. "Wait," he said, his voice shaky. Are you Clara Bennett?" The room went quiet. Clara's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her composure. She didn't know if this was the moment she had been dreading, or if it was just another coincidence. The man stepped closer, his eyes wide with realization. "I can't believe it," he muttered, almost to himself. "I had no idea." The tension in the room was suffocating. Everyone's eyes shifted between Clara and the man, waiting for the truth to unfold. What would she do now? How would they react when they learned who she really was? The man's voice trembled as he spoke Clara's name. The room was now heavy with anticipation. Clara's gaze flickered to his face, then to the others who had gathered around, eyes wide and fixed on her. She had expected this moment to come one day, someone discovering who she was, or at least making the connection. But what happened next completely shattered her composure. The man, still staring at her in disbelief, slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. I have to show you something," he said, almost whispering. Without waiting for her response, he turned the screen toward her, revealing a news article. Clara Bennett, billionaire tech CEO, allegedly involved in high-stakes fraud scheme. A chill ran through Clara. The headline alone was enough to stop her heart. The article was filled with accusations that she had been involved in an illegal financial scheme, embezzling millions from investors under the guise of her successful startup. The story painted her as a villain, a person who had used her company to launder money and dodge taxes. Clara felt a wave of panic rise inside her, but she quickly masked it with a calm that had been forged over years of adversity. She had never seen this article before, but the name, the details, it was unmistakably about her. Was this a coincidence? Or had someone deliberately planted this story? The weight of the situation sank in. It was no longer just about her past being revealed. Now, her future was at risk. She could feel the room closing in around her. The man with the phone looked at her, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Is this true?" he asked, his voice now thick with suspicion. Before Clara could answer, someone from the crowd stepped forward, someone she didn't recognize. "We need to talk," the stranger said, locking eyes with her. The tension had reached its peak, and Clara knew this was only the beginning. The stranger stepped closer, his eyes sharp and calculating. Clara felt a bead of sweat trickle down her neck, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea who he was, but she could sense the danger in his presence. The man with the phone, still holding it out, looked between Clara and the stranger, waiting for a response. Clara, you need to explain yourself, he demanded. Clara opened her mouth to speak, but before she could utter a word, the stranger held up a hand. Hold on, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. He turned to the man with the phone and then to the others in the room. Let me explain, he said, his eyes flashing with an intensity that made everyone pause. That article is a lie. The crowd murmured, clearly confused. Clara blinked, unsure of what to make of this new development. The crowd murmured, clearly confused. Clara blinked, unsure of what to make of this new development. The stranger continued, I've been following Clara's career for years. That story, about her being involved in fraud, is part of a smear campaign. Someone is trying to take her down, and this article is the first step in a much larger plot. Clara's head was spinning. She had never heard of this person before, but his words rang true. The shock on her face must have been clear, because the stranger gave her a knowing look. You don't remember me, do you? He asked. Clara's mind raced, trying to place him, and then it clicked. It was someone she had worked with years ago, someone from the early days of her startup. He had vanished after a mysterious fallout, but now he was back, seemingly out of nowhere. Who's behind this? She asked, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. The stranger smiled faintly, but it wasn't a smile of reassurance. That's the twist, Clara. You're not just the target, you're the bait. Before she could respond, the door to the lobby crashed open, and another figure stepped in, someone Clara knew all too well. A man she thought had been out of her life forever. The true mastermind was standing right in front of her. The figure who stepped into the lobby was none other than Clara's former business partner, Lucas. His presence sent a wave of shock through the room, and Clara's stomach twisted. She hadn't seen him in years, not since the bitter fallout that had split their company apart. Lucas had always been ambitious, but his hunger for success had made him reckless. It was his decision to cut corners and make risky deals that had ultimately caused the company's downfall. At least, that's what Clara had believed. Clara, Lucas said with a cold smile, his voice dripping with condescension. Did you really think I'd just let you walk away with all the glory? That I wouldn't get my cut? Clara's heart sank as the pieces finally clicked into place. Lucas had orchestrated the smear campaign, hoping to destroy her reputation and force her to sell the company to him for pennies. He had been behind the fake news article, and now he was here to finish what he had started. The stranger who had come to her defense, Clara now realized, wasn't just a random ally. He was a former employee who had been with her during the early days of the company, a loyal friend who had stayed hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to expose Lucas. I should have known it was you, Clara muttered, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. You never could accept failure, could you? Lucas stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. You think you're smarter than me? You think you're going to win this time? But before he could react further, the police stormed into the lobby, led by the stranger who had revealed Lucas's plan. Clara had already taken steps to expose him, and the evidence was now in the hands of the authorities. As Lucas was led away in handcuffs, Clara took a deep breath. Her name had been cleared, but it was more than just that. She had finally learned to trust her instincts, her ability to rise above the chaos and see through the lies. As she left the hotel, the weight that had once held her down lifted, and she felt, for the first time in years, truly free.